핀리스 로버스란 부대표님께서 오셔서 발표해 주시겠습니다. 유럽의 재생에너지 현황, 지속가능한 일자리와 성장하는 산업을 위한 기회와 도전이라는 제목입니다.
Thanks to the organizers for inviting me, and I try to somehow fulfill the expectations of providing some lessons learned from Europe. Just tell me how to, here we go. So, indeed, I'm not going to talk about factors of job creation, how to count it, and statistics. There are much better experts to do this than myself, but I will talk about frameworks, policies which will help and which did help and which are not so helpful to continue the growth of renewable energies and to develop the renewable energy industry. Maybe first a word who I am and who the organization is which I'm representing. EREF, the European Renewable Energies Federation, is the umbrella organization of the national renewable energy organizations. So you know that the European Union is a specific alliance of countries, and in all these countries we have aligned but somehow different policies for renewable energy. And my association is working with the umbrella organizations of renewables, so not only wind, solar, but also PV, geothermal, and hydro, and we are covering not only the electricity sector, but also the heating and cooling and transport sector. So we are talking about the integrated energy transition, and we believe that integration and sector coupling will be a major part of the future energy system. It will help develop the industry. So what I try to do in 15 minutes or 15 and a half is give you a very, very short overview of how I see the European renewable energy industry in the global context, and then I'll talk a bit more in detail about Europe's achievements, and I'll give you an impression with what kind of policies in Europe the development of renewable energy was achieved so far, and what we can expect until 2030, which is the near future, and until 2050, which is the perspective we are thinking in. And finally, like always in a presentation, I try to give some recommendations or some insights on how it should continue. First of all, let's be aware there is a lot of investment globally in renewable energy, and these figures are all taken from the Global Status Report of REN21, the co-organizer of the CAIREC conference. We have had investment of about $290 billion last year, but what you see is that over the last years, investment in renewable energy globally was stagnating. It was not growing. And the reason for this is not, well, it's twofold. One is you get much more renewable energy installation for the same amount of money because prices are falling, but still the potential is not fully tapped because policies are slowing down. So actually we could have much more investment with, let me say, quadruple or quintuple amount of installations. So it's stagnating, but the energy sector is growing. In the investment, solar power and wind power are dominating, and what is interesting, and I'll dwell a bit on this, is there are regional differences. First of all, you see that in many parts of the world, including this part here, Asia and Oceania, we have stable investment over the last few years, investment amounts not really growing, and obviously some more deployment. Then you see the phenomenon of China, where except for the last year, where they cut down their investment for once, it was constantly growing up to 150 billion euros. And in contrast, and this is why I highlight China, in contrast you see Europe. We had a peak of investment in 2011, and since then it was going down and more or less stagnating. The reason why, and I'll come back to this in a minute, is that policies are existing but not really being developed so that investors have a confidence on how to go on. this will be the last slide of the global context. You see here the top 5 countries in different sectors of new investment, new capacity addition last year. And if you look at the names of the countries, you will have hard time finding the old champions of renewable energy. So still there is Germany number 3 in wind power capacity and number 4 in biodiesel capacity. But apart from that, you see other countries, China, US, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Thailand, Canada, so Brazil for biofuels. You see there are new countries coming up with renewable energy investment. We see the fastest growing technologies, and I think Morten in his statement later will come back to the wind industry is constantly growing. We are at close to 600 gigawatts global capacity and annual installations being fast. But again, here you see the former frontrunner, Germany and Spain, they are quite falling back, and we see China and the US, despite Donald Trump, who does not like renewables, China and the US being the champions in new capacity. Then we have solar PV with more than 500 gigawatts installation, 100 of this already only done in 1 year. Global PV markets are more and more moving towards other parts than the old champions. So Germany is still there as a big bloc, but you have China, you have the US, you have Japan, you have India coming up as new champions. And maybe this graph shows it even stronger. On the top, the lower blue is Europe. The market share in PV is shifting from Europe more and more to China and the Asian Pacific region. And in light green, you also see Africa and the MENA region coming up. So this is a graph, an important figure. We're talking about jobs so far, and Professor showed that already. We have 11 million people being employed in renewables. Again, solar and wind and bioenergy being top. Let me now come to what we did and where we are in Europe. In Europe, at present, we have 1.2 million people employed in renewable energy, many of them in solid biomass, wind and solar PV. What should be highlighted, this is an impressive figure, yes, but on the other hand, it did not grow significantly over the last few years. The reason for this, again, is that we had, let me say, some turbulences in policy development, particularly a couple of years ago in solar industry, when a lot of investment was destroyed because policy uncertainty drove investors out of Europe. And now we are facing a problem, at least in some countries, with wind energy development, again, due to policy failures. Still, if you look at new power capacity in Europe, I put it like it's renewables and nothing else. So we have around 90% last year of new power capacity was wind and solar. This may slightly change this year because I see much less installation, particularly in wind and in one of the former front-runner countries, Germany. PV markets in Europe, you see from a few countries, which was Germany, France, and Germany, Spain, and others. It has meanwhile developed to a broad mix of many countries who are active in PV. But you also see from a peak in 2011, it has gone down to something less ambitious now. The European solar industry, they forecast that we will have a steady growth in the next 5 years. So there may be good job chances in the PV sector. And these job chances from 2018 to 2023 will develop in several countries, Germany, Spain, France, Italy, Turkey, Ukraine, Portugal, and several others in Europe. So there will be a widespread of jobs in PV industry around the world. Wind power is growing steadily, but not as fast as PV in the last few years. And we see that if you look at all the capacity we have, and if you look at the cumulative installations, Germany still is the champion. But if you look at last year only, you see that other countries, UK, France, Sweden, are catching up. And when you get to see the figures of 2019, you will see that it will be even closer. So where are we in Europe? Europe has targets for 2020, which should be achieved next year. They are going to be reached by a differentiated policy framework with binding national targets, with sub-targets for the transport sector, with an efficiency target of 20%, and with a quite complex but effective legal framework. Nevertheless, and this is one of the drops of water in the nice glass of wine, you see with all these graphs the target of 20%, which you see on your left, is not yet reached, and so far we are not sure whether the European Union as a whole will reach it. On the other hand, you see there are countries like Sweden, Finland, Latvia, who have already reached their targets. There are others like Luxembourg, United Kingdom, Belgium, Slovakia and others who are far away from their targets, including my home country, Germany, but Manfred will talk about this later in his presentation. So it looks like the growth of renewable energy and related jobs is not as tremendous as it should be, and so this may be missing chances. Just recently, this year, the European Union agreed to increase the targets for renewable energy and for efficiency and greenhouse gas reduction. You see it here. The new target for 2030 now is we want to achieve 23% renewable energy in Europe. And if I say energy, this means energy and not only electricity. It includes heating and cooling and transport. In the electricity sector, the figures are significantly higher. We have a newly agreed policy framework, and again, because we are talking about job creation, let me just mention a few elements of this framework. One of them is the new target of at least 32% renewable energy in 2030. Another one is every member state of the European Union needs to provide a national action plan where they outline with which policy measures, with which other measures this target is going to be reached. There are instruments on the European level to fill the gap in case the target is not reached. Then we have, for the first time, which is important, an indicative target not only for energy in specific or for electricity, but also for heating and cooling. There must be an annual increase of 1.3 percentage points. And there is a specific target for transport. And what is also very important, there are several regulations strengthening self-consumption and renewable energy communities. Meaning, apart from the jobs in the renewable energy industry, the big industry, the utilities and the manufacturers, there will be a lot of chances, including for distributed job creation in local activities, in integrating citizens and local companies in the job development of renewables. There are initiatives to adopt the market design so that it is really able to accommodate high shares of renewable energy. Just a few elements I mention here: priority dispatch and its exceptions from balancing responsibility for small renewable energy installations. Households or small groups, they cannot act as a utility, they must have other ways. And it is said that when you have problems in the electricity system, under the rule of last curtailment, whenever you can, for technical reasons, renewables should run through and other power plants should be cut off and should be curtailed. And this will help, of course, investment in renewables and job creation. Renewables should have the right to be part of all market segments, including balancing markets, system services markets, and this can be done by shortening gate closure times, meaning you don't have to bid weeks or months ahead for these deliverances, but due to digitalization, this can be done in very, very short windows, 15 minutes or even real time. There is cross-border cooperation between all the different member states and grid operators, and active consumers shall play their role. Let me now look at the nearer future, which is 2050. So I talked about 2020 targets and frameworks, the new framework for 2030, which has targets which are quite ambitious. But of course, everybody knows in the energy sector you need a long-term vision, and also for greenhouse gas reduction you need a long-term vision. This is why the European Union has at least a draft from the European Commission, a draft strategy for long-term decarbonization. Like always, there are nice titles, and this time is A Clean Planet for All, Strategic Vision for a Prosperous Europe. You see here, and this is the scientific part of it, the European Commission calculated on how this can be done, which energy mix can be done, which will be the preferences, more electrification, more hydrogen, a mix of all. And actually what they did, they found that only 2 of their scenarios come close to the necessary decarbonization. And the other thing is, indeed, what they did not do, and this is what we as the renewable energy sector are criticizing, they did not even try to calculate a scenario where it's all done by renewables. And I'm really convinced that for greenhouse gas reduction and even more for building up and maintaining a sustainable industry, we really need to go to 100% renewable energy. So once this strategy was presented, a controversial debate started. Some countries who are heavily relying on coal said, oh, this is much too fast, let's not do it, or let's just have nice words and no action. Others, like for instance, Austria, Ireland, Lithuania, Luxembourg, said, please go ahead and also think about 100% renewables. The European Parliament said, it's great we have this objective to be greenhouse gas neutral, but let's think on doing better. For greenhouse gas reduction reasons, the industrialized countries like the ones in Europe have to be faster than the rest of the world. So let's think of being there before 2050 already. On the other hand, the member states are still a bit hesitant whether this can be done. What's happening, indeed, the discussion is ongoing on how to move towards this 2050 target, how exactly the strategy should look like, which interim targets there should be, with which measures we can really achieve the net zero emissions in 2050, and of course, how the growth of renewables and energy efficiency can actually contribute it. And at this point in time, I just give you another potential figure. I said we have 1.2 million jobs now in renewable energy. They could be growing much faster. We believe that in 2030, if the target of 32% is achieved, this could easily double with a higher target, which we believe would be useful for greenhouse gas reductions and for industry development. Even more jobs could be created. So going for more renewables will mean going for more jobs and more economic development. This is my last slide. So I think the important point now is that those who take the decisions help investors understand that it's safe to invest in renewable energy and not irritate them by frequent changes of policy framework. So this long-term strategy, which is agreed, is quite important so that we know in 2050 it all goes more or less towards renewable energy. But as I said, this process is still ongoing, and I hope it will be finished quite soon. And if the process is successfully finished, we'll have an innovative industry, and this can really be high-tech and high-value creation. We will have clean air, we will have greenhouse gas reduction as we need, we will have health benefits, and we will have at least 2 to 3 million jobs by 2030 and many more in 2050, all over the countries and all over the European Union. And I think this is what we can learn with good policies, with decisive policies and unambiguous measures. We can achieve that, we can have value creation and good and decent jobs. Thank you, and open for questions.